Have you ever seen those very short skirts and thought that you like the look, but you don't have the confidence to wear them? Well, I've got the solution. Today we're sewing beautiful flared shirts that have the look of a short skirt, but you don't have to worry about them flying up. And the best part, they come with pockets. Hello and welcome! I'm Maren, and on this channel I show you how to create beautiful and practical pieces for your wardrobe. First, I'm going to show you how to make the pattern and then step by step how to sew the pants. If you don't want to make the pattern yourself, you can access it on my Patreon and support me. Let's get started! To make the pattern, you just need a pair of pants that fits you well, and I'm going to be using this one, which I painted in a previous video. So I start by taping some paper together, and then I pin it onto my pair of pants to make sure that it won't move around. And then I just take a pencil and trace out my pants, and just always make sure that it's lying down flat. And I also mark the pocket and the zipper fly, but you don't have to mark the fly for this pair of pants. I just wanted to use the pattern for other pants as well, so I thought maybe it will be helpful to have it marked. And then I just add seam allowance, cut it out, and repeat the same steps on the back piece. If you're wondering why my background looks different, I moved and the nature here looks incredible, so stay tuned for some pretty video footage at the end. I now have a pattern for a long pair of pants, but what I want to make is a pair of flared out shorts, so let me show you how to customize this pattern. First, I take the front piece and I trace it onto another piece of paper, and I just crop it where I think it's gonna work great for shorts. So you can just make your shorts as long as you want them to be. And then I draw some lines onto the piece from the bottom edge towards the waistline. And this is where you're going to cut, but you're only going to cut from the bottom edge towards the seam allowance line, and then from the top edge again towards the seam allowance. So the pieces are only connected at a very small point at the seam allowance, and this enables you to spread out the pieces to create more volume at the bottom edge. And then I straighten out the side seam because there's now so much volume in these pants that the hip curve is not needed anymore. Next, I take the back piece and I trace it out as well, and then I have to do some calculations. So what we basically want to know is how much bigger your hip measurement is than your waist measurement, because this is the amount you have to add to your back piece of your pants to be able to get in and out of your pants. So whenever you're doing this, just follow the calculations I wrote down. It's really not as hard as it looks. And now I knew that my waistline of the back piece has to be 10.6 centimeters bigger, so I just added those 10.6 centimeters onto the side seam and on the side of the crotch seam. Now you can go on just like with the front piece, so just draw on the lines from the bottom edge towards the waistline, then cut them and spread out the piece. And when spreading out the front and back piece, I align the side seam and the center front seam with the edges of my table, so it's a 90-degree angle, and then I just put some paper underneath it and tape it down to secure it in place. At the end, I just adjusted my pocket pattern, which I also traced from my original pair of pants, to the new waistline because now it's a lot more curved. The pattern is finished, so it's time to cut everything out. And this is the fabric I'm going to use. It's a green viscose, and I just hope so much that I have enough of it because I didn't intend this fabric for this project when I bought it. So fingers crossed, let's cut everything out. Before I could even start to cut out the pieces, I had to wash and press the fabric to make sure that it won't shrink. And then I always align the side seam and the front and back seam with the grain line of the fabric. And I also always pin the pieces onto the fabric so it won't move around. And I pinned within the seam allowance because sometimes the pins can leave holes in the fabric, and then it's just very nice if those holes are not visible in the end. After cutting out all the main pieces, it was just like a miracle that I was able to cut out the waistband in one piece, which is, by the way, just as long as the waistlines of both front and back pieces together and 11 centimeters wide. After cutting out the waistband, this is all I had left of my fabric, so it was impossible to cut out 4 pocket pieces, and that's why I cut only the visible part of the pocket from the green fabric and the not visible part from just a different fabric. Everything is finally cut out, and I'm just so glad that it worked out to cut out the main pieces of the pants from my fabric. It was just such a struggle, and my advice is to just always buy a little bit more fabric than you think you need, so cutting out is not such a mess. And now we can start assembling the pockets. So I take the white and the green pieces and sew them both together on the curve, and while sewing this seam, you just have to make sure that the green fabric is evenly a little bit gathered to the white fabric, because the curve is just in the opposite direction, so it's a little bit hard to sew, but it's definitely doable. But I would just recommend to cut it out in one piece. I miss my old Bernina, which was too heavy for the luggage, but I thrifted this sewing machine and it works just as well. If you're interested in a thrift experience and tips video or review for this sewing machine, let me know. And afterwards I just pressed it and top stitched it and then pressed it again. Next I have to cut out the curve of the pocket where you can actually put your hand in, and you cut off this piece on the front pieces of the pants and on the pocket piece. And I would recommend to make not a curved pocket opening but a straight one close to the side seam, because that way the pocket won't interfere with the way the pants fall in the front. Then I put the pocket piece and the front piece right sides facing each other and pin them together, and then I just flip them around and make sure that it's going to be correct when I sew it. And then I just sew along the curve and flip it over and press it, and while pressing I make sure that the green side is a little bit visible from the right side, so that you won't be able to see the right side from the outside. Next I top stitch along this curved line to make sure that it's going to stay nice and flat. Next we are closing up the pocket, so take your pocket piece and fold it wrong sides facing each other. This is right sides together, this is wrong sides together, and sew along the bottom edge, and while sewing only leave a very small seam allowance because we're going to sew the seam again. So after you're done with sewing, flip the pocket inside out and poke at the corner, and then sew along the bottom edge once again, and this way we're creating a French seam and a very nice finished edge. At the end, put the pocket into the correct position and secure it in place on the waist and the side seam. I finished to sew in the pockets, and if you're thinking right now this sounds way too overwhelming, then you can also just skip putting in the pockets and just sew these pants without pockets. But I think it's worth figuring it out because pockets are just very practical, and you can also just rewatch the part of the video and maybe you'll figure it out. And if you have any questions, you can just leave a comment down below. But right now let's put these pants together. First take a front piece and a back piece and put them right sides facing each other, and then you can sew the side seam and the inner leg seam. Just sew them together with a very normal straight stitch, and after sewing it together you have to finish the seam, and preferably you do that with an overlock. But if you don't have one on hand like I do, then you have to use a zigzag stitch and cut off the excess fabric, and it works as well, but it's just so annoying. I hate doing that, and I just miss my overlock so much. After you're done with doing that to both front and back pieces, take one piece and turn it inside out and the other one right side out, and then put the one that is right side out into the one that is inside out, and then the pieces should be right sides facing each other, and you can sew them together along the curved edge. Again, just sew together with a very normal straight stitch, and afterwards you're gonna have to zigzag stitch it. And then I really needed a break because it was just so hot in this room. But the pants were turning out great, so I got very excited and hemmed it. So first I pressed it and folded it over twice, because if you press it, it looks twice as good as if you would fold it while sewing. And while you're sewing, make always sure that you're catching the fabric underneath, especially if you're sewing from the right side, what I did. And while sewing, try to not stretch out the hem because it will make it look wavy. But after sewing, you're gonna have to press the hem anyways to make it look professional. And while pressing, most of the waves are gonna be removed. Although I'm sewing the hem at this point in the process, I would recommend to wait until you have attached the waistband, because then you can see whether your pants are too long or too short, hopefully not, but then it's a lot easier to adjust the hem. It's looking like pants! And right now they are still way too big for me, but that is correct because they have to fit over my hips. And now the last thing to do is to make a waistband with an elastic, and the elastic is going to gather the back and then it's going to fit. First, fold over one edge of the waistband about 1 centimeter and press it in place. Then close up the waistband so it's just as long as the waist of your shorts. Then again, finish the seam, cut off the excess and press it towards one side. And then you have to find the midpoint on the other side, so opposite of the seam you just sewed. And then you can evenly pin the waistband onto the waist of your pants. And I aligned the seam to the center back, but you could also put it at one of the sides. Next you have to sew the waistband and the shorts together on the seam we just pinned. Then finish the seam, which takes forever, and press the waistband up and press the seam allowance towards the waistband, so press it up as well. The waistband is currently half attached, so right now I need an elastic that is 4 centimeters wide to put into the waistband. And I went to the fabric store, but I just couldn't find an elastic that was 4 centimeters wide and stretchy enough, because it has to be possible to stretch the elastic to twice its length for this design to work. So I went to the thrift store and I found this skirt. And my plan is to seam rip the waistband of the skirt because there's an elastic in there, and hopefully this elastic is stretchy enough and I can use it for my pants. So let's seam rip this. At the beginning I thought that I only had to seam rip a very small area and then I would be able to pull the waistband out, but very quickly I noticed that the waistband is sewn in place all the way around, so I had to seam rip all the way around. But luckily the elastic that I was able to see at this point was looking very good, so I was very happy. And I think from the fabric of the skirt I'm going to make a cushion cover, because I think it's gonna look kinda cool with the pockets on it, and everything needs pockets. But I got my elastic. So now I can finally make the waistband, so I fold over about 1 centimeter on the top edge of the waistband and press it in place, and then fold over the waistband again. And now the top edge of the waistband covers the seam that connects the waistband to the shorts. And it's also important that you make sure that your elastic is going to fit into your waistband. Then sew the waistband down from the outside of your shorts and try to sew exactly on the seam where the waistband is connected to the shorts, but just a little bit towards the shorts side, so definitely don't sew on the waistband, and this method is called stitch in the ditch. Then all that's left to do is to insert the elastic and close it up to a length that fits your waist. And then you have to make sure that the waistband only gathers the back of the shorts and the front is lying completely flat, and then you can secure the elastic in place above the side seams, and don't forget to close up the opening we left to insert the elastic. At the end I had some fixing to do in the front because it was not falling like I wanted it to, and that is probably because of the curved pocket shape and also because I used a different fabric that is a little bit more stiff. And I also had to rehab the back side because it was just too long and looking weird. But after I did that, these shorts were finally done. It's finished and I think it looks very nice. To be honest, when I first tried it on, I was a bit disappointed because it looked so weird in the front and the back was too long. But now that those things are fixed, I really like it. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to my channel so you won't miss the next project in which I'm finally gonna be using this fabric for what I actually bought it for. But now, without further ado, let's have a look at the finished shorts.